Jason Shogren. Dr. Shogren is the Strick Professor of Natural Resource Conservation and Management at the University of Wyoming. He has served as a lead author for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and is a senior economist on the Council of Economic Advisors in the White House. Today he will talk about incentives in conservation.
Thanks for having me. I am an economist. Is there any other economists in the room? Two. I think in 30 years I can safely say I've never seen a slide of a charismatic anal gland before. As an economist, typically we stay away from that stuff. So, in thinking about incentives in conservation, I mean, most of you obviously are not economists, so maybe I could get another, raise your hands. How many of you non-economists trust economists?
When we can figure out the economy, I'll tell you.
That's probably better than I suspected, ex ante. But to think about it, sort of put it in context, to say that an economist only studies the economy is like saying a zoologist only studies what happens in the zoo, right? I mean, what we try to do is, that way I try to frame it and explain it, is more like we're applied philosophers, in the sense that we stick our nose in lots of different things and ask people to consider trade-offs, and ask people to consider what they want versus what they need. And we try to frame the discussions so that we can allow policymakers to make choices. And I think that's our biggest role in the discussion, especially with endangered species, is not so much to say, save this, save that, but to frame the question, because we have lots of tools at our disposal. We have lots of people who know lots of things, but it's getting everybody in the same room to think about the same question at the same time is sort of our role in the process. And I'm sort of, my job is to be agnostic. My job is to promote efficiency, to try to get the most out of what we've got. And I remember one time I was at a conservation biology department in the University of Minnesota, and having a discussion. He said, but we're all about scarcity. I said, well, that is economics. That's what we do too. So let's just see if we can get on the same page to start. So if we think about economics, so let's just take, sorry to bring you back to principles. It's the study of value created through trade and coordination. I mean, that's really what we're up to. We're trying to figure out how to get more for what we've got, given that people are interacting at all sorts of different levels. And we're trying to understand this idea of economic value, which is market and non-market values. And we're trying to understand how, in terms of conservation, we're actually creating value. Now, we could sort of redefine it and not have value be about people, but then I'm out of a job. Okay, so, I mean, that's really what we're talking about. And when we think about economic value, typically we see a lot of this idea of eco-engineering valuation, which is market price times quantity, and we just say P times Q, there's your value, and we're done. But economists get all complicated, and we want to talk about economic valuation, which is the surplus measures, how much you would have paid, but you got to pay less, how much you would have sold it for, but you got more, and we try to calculate these welfare triangles. And what's really important to us is the notion that we have markets to deliver these goods, or we have non-markets, and we've got substitutes, and we've got this general equilibrium, just like your web of life, everybody's flowing through the system. So are they close enough? Not really. And this is the big difference. Boy, this is back to principles, isn't it? So we've got A and B here, which is P times Q. And we're talking about the quantity of conservation here, and we assume there is a demand curve for conservation. For whatever reason it is, we don't care what the demand curve is, that it exists. And we've got a supply, and it's definitely the best we can do, given that we don't have infinite budgets. Now, if we're trying to measure value and we say it's A times B, and economists are talking to you, and they're talking in terms of A and C, no wonder we don't get along. Right? We're talking about two very different things, and it's only going to be by luck that C and B are going to be the same thing. It's going to depend on this elasticity of demand, so that if you've got a species that's incredibly small and incredibly rare, the demand curve might look like this, and the economist is actually your friend, right? Because C is huge. If you go back and you think about that 97 paper in Nature about what's the value of the Earth's ecosystem, and they said about $35 trillion. The economist's reaction to that is, no, that's a serious underestimate of infinity. Okay? Because there is no substitute for the planet, so even economists have got that one figured out, right? So if we're talking about species that are incredibly small populations, incredibly rare, like the one graph we saw earlier about the 500 spots, that probably the demand curve may or may not look like this, depending on who we're asking. But the value of actually protecting them may well suggest that, the estimates of trying to understand the cost of management versus the benefits that could exist. There could be a lot of benefits in it. We just don't know. We haven't measured them. So what I want to talk about a little bit today is why we think economics matters. And the very first one, I'd say, to me, is probably the most important, because this is the one where we get directly in your face. It's not that you guys do the science and then tell us to mop up and do the cost-effective analysis or do the cost-benefit analysis. For the last, probably as long as I've been doing this, the notion is that, of course, we affect nature, nature affects us. Relative biological parameters matter, but so do relative economic parameters matter. If a species is endangered, it's only strictly a biological phenomenon at this nanosecond. If we go any time out in the future with any kind of development pressure, any kind of human pressure, all the parameters that matter to us should matter to you. They should be in your models. We should have biological parameters in economic models and economic parameters in biological models. Now, I don't want to get all up in your grill here, but I think it's really fundamental, because you've all taken econometrics, you all know about omitted variable bias, and for economists to ignore the biological parameters, we're sort of getting over that. It's taken a few hundred years, but we're getting over it. And now we're kind of coming back at you and asking you to include our parameters in your models to get better, precise estimates of risk. We just don't want to value things for you. We want to actually be in your models to try to estimate, help you get a better estimate. Mike has done some of this work over here. We've done some of it over the last 20 years or so. And the estimates are quite a bit different, order of magnitude different in terms of actual risk versus what's estimated without the economics. Opportunity costs matter. Well, you can't avoid scarcity. And incentives matter, obviously, because social goals and private decisions and information diverge. So when I think about framing conservation questions, I go through this as my checklist. If we're talking about a toolkit, this is my toolkit. So what failed? What's at risk? What's the conflict? Can we coordinate? Can we cooperate? Can we control it? Should we monetize the non-market goods? And can we prosper and do better for all creatures, which is sort of the bottom line. And so I go through my little checklist here in trying to frame this discussion if I'm going to give advice to a policymaker who has to make a very hard decision. Being in Wyoming, our decisions aren't that hard. We don't have that many people. We've got 500,000 people, and that's nearly a doubling of the population in the last 20, 30 years. California, you guys got problems. I think I was in the California news just this last week. I got a phone call about the Delta smelt. And they said, what do you think about it as an economist? I said, man, you got a problem. That's what I think about it. I don't have an answer for you, but so I'm in the news saying you've got a problem. Not like you really needed meat from Wyoming. Right? I mean, where's the trade-offs are pretty fundamental here. So what is the problem? What failed? So typically when you think about an economist and you think about a market economy, we usually point to market failure as being the big one, you know. Externalities, public goods, non-convexities, asymmetric information, common property, open access resources. Monopolies are our typical way to think about market failure. And for small populations, a lot of times this could be the case if you have development that's encroaching on important habitat. But there's also other types of failure that we probably should consider. Coordination failure. Coordination games are probably the most important aspect of environmental policy that are underappreciated in terms of trying to understand multiple equilibria in some social system and how do we actually coordinate to a better place. Institutional or organizational failure, yeah, this is sort of the dismal part of the dismal science. Even the people who are supposed to help us screwed up. Okay, now what? Right? Behavioral failure. You guys have probably seen a lot of books out there in the press like Predictably, Irrationality, and Nudge, and all this sort of behavioral economics. I'm an economist who's interested in behavior. I'm not necessarily a behavioral economist, but the questions are, you know, Kahneman and Tversky and all the work on trying to integrate psychology into economics to try to understand some of these problems is probably relevant too. So let me briefly go through these types of failures and what we've done to frame the problem and try to understand, and in the context of endangered species or conservation, and you could take it down to small populations as you will. So we know that habitat conservation on private lands is a big thing, and the compensation question here is the biggest one. So if you got a market failure, economist reaction is to create a new market, either through a price or a quantity constraint or a liability rule, or somehow take what's otherwise free and put some sort of price on it so people get a signal that it is scarce and we want to pay attention to it. But the compensation question in terms of political reality becomes fairly complicated. You get two ends of the spectrum that are not willing to trade on both ends. You get the middle group who are willing to take money, subsidies for conservation easements and that sort of thing, and actually be able to trade. I'm a board of trustee member for the Wyoming branch of the Nature Conservancy. And so, you know, I watch deals being made all the time, buying ranches, selling ranches, putting, you know, we just bought, I don't know how much we spent, $6 million to buy a couple ranches in the middle of the state that we're gonna flip after we put easements on them. But there are extremes who do not want to give money to people to conserve because it's the right thing to do and they should just do it. And you got some ranchers who do not want money because they just see it as the nose of the camel coming in the tent, and pretty soon you got all sorts of helicopters and things flying around and telling you what to do, right? Even though Wyoming per capita has more federal subsidies than anywhere except maybe Alaska. I think we're second. So, you know, the independent cowboy is kind of a joke. Right? Biological needs, political realities, and these are the ones that I deal with every day. The sweat equity, people want it protected, want their privacy maintained, and they want their stewardship acknowledged. That is a big part of the Intermountain, Rocky Mountain West, is the political realities about the Endangered Species Act and trying to make a difference on private lands. The incentive ideas, you guys have probably seen a lot of them in terms of zoning all the way down to conservation easements, to conservation banking and tradable development rights. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. California has long been a pioneer in all these things, thinking about them. But this really is all about correcting market failure. All right? It's all about getting a price on something that doesn't have a price. Coordination failure, this is a little trickier because when we think about coordinating endangered species or small species protection, we're talking about games between peoples, games between neighbors, my reaction to your reaction, me knowing that you know that I know that you know, right? I mean, thinking about trying to coordinate across public lands and private lands when you're trying to create these corridors. I remember reading about the Y to Y project, right, from the Yucatan to the Yukon. I think it was first from Yellowstone, but now they've stretched it out. So it's Y to Y to Y. And thinking about how do you coordinate and build these corridors over private and public lands when we only have so many Ted Turners, right? You can only buy so much land. We don't have, you got a couple guys in Wyoming who own a few, half a million acres, you know, but there's not that many that can pull that off. So how do you do it? Well, one idea we came up with was the agglomeration bonus. You might as well exploit network externalities in the sense that if you've got a retired acre somebody puts an easement on, let's pay them a little bit extra if it touches or is contiguous to another acre. It makes sense. I mean, that's why cities were formed, right, to get these network externalities. Well, here you got all the multiple Nash equilibria, payoff dominance, risk dominance, strategic uncertainty. It's all our jargon to say, how do you coordinate? Okay, if you've got coordination failure, you've got the fragmentation you're all worried about, and you have these second best habitats that we've created. We can think of biological efficiency and economic efficiency in the sense of, do we hit the target that you're trying to create, and do we do it at the least cost possible? Right, so here's a typical way we would do it. 2 players, they got 8 choices. Here they've got 4 different equilibria, 4 different Nash equilibria. We want to coordinate to this one. That's the social optimum. That's the risk dominant one. Well, people can do 4. You know, I mean, not great, but they can do it. And if you give them experience and let them talk much, let them talk, they will be able to coordinate. Now, of course, journal referees say this is too simple. So we built this game. 10 by 10 grids with 100 cells, 4 players, you own 25 cells, you got 68 plus thousand strategies, we got 68 to the 4 potential outcomes, we've got 7,000 plus Nash equilibria, and we have 1 that's the best. And all we give them is this agglomeration bonus menu that says if you touch your neighbor to the south, we pay you this, if you touch them to the west, we pay you that. And so we ran it, and here's our target habitat. You can imagine 4 neighbors here sitting, and this could be, we're trying to create a grizzly bear habitat or something. Okay, so if we just pay them per acre, you can see people retired the cheapest acre. They just, not the pattern we wanted if we just pay them a conservation easement per acre retired. Sorry, I take this back. We just made them this compulsion. Now we paid them to retire, and the pattern's about the same. And these are laboratory experiments we ran on students at the University of Wyoming. So they're actually retiring acres. Now we gave them the agglomeration bonus, and wow, yeah, it was like a miracle, right? I mean, people actually coordinated when they got paid. You know, it wasn't a big deal. Now the question is, can we move it to the field? People have been interested in this idea. People have talked about it. I've seen it pop up in different places in the non-economic literature. I'm happy that this idea is getting out there because you might as well take the money we have and use it smarter. You know, pay people to coordinate. You'll get coordination. You know, it pays off. And we'll see how it works. We also tried it with tradable set-asides, and you can see the same sort of pattern when you throw in the bonus. Institutional failure. I think I got like 2 minutes. I got a whole list of papers that basically says politics matters more than science. How about that? You know, you guys have your work cut out for you. You know, when I spent the year in the White House, I was the environmental economist, and my job was to do my best to communicate your fears to my principal, which was Janet Yellen, who's now Ben Bernanke's vice president of the Federal Reserve. And nothing I said ever really bugged her. I mean, she was working on the macroeconomy until finally I said, you know, big things happen. Gulf streams can shift. Webs of life can unravel. Then I got her attention, right? So they're focused on things that, you know, this was during the Kyoto Protocol run-up, and I couldn't get her attention as the chief economic advisor about what climate change really meant until I talked about the Gulf Stream shifting. Some big event with low probability, but really big, right? Yeah, politics matters. Behavioral failure. I don't have time to go through this one, but one of the things we're spending a lot of time arguing about in economics is whether actually paying people crowds out their incentive to do good things. Are we corrupting them with money? So you would do the right thing for the right reason because you're you, and then I offer you money. And the example that we give is there was a child care center in Israel, and they started charging a fine for when you were late. And the parents actually were later. But you went back and sort of reanalyzed the results, and what you found out, it was $5 an hour babysitting. I'd be late at $5 an hour babysitting. That's a heck of a deal. If you look at real daycare centers, they charge like $1 a minute. You're late, and people are never late. So the question about crowding out intrinsic motivations with extrinsic rewards, we're right in the middle of this debate, and whether or not we can actually, we're screwing things up by trying to make things better. I have, yeah, okay, whoa, there you go. Yeah, okay, so that's just what I said, except I say an equation, and I've got more equations, and let's get to the end here. Okay, so market failure, we've already talked about that. Zoning, taxes, cap and trade, species banking. Coordination failure, thinking about agglomeration bonuses, focal points, thinking about Schelling's ideas in terms of how do you get people to coordinate. Institutional failure, I'm going to leave you guys on your own on this one. I mean, it's the people we put in. You know, I'm Fish and Wildlife Service, please don't take that personally. But I mean, if this is what we're talking about in terms of setting priorities, the last one, this behavioral failure, is sort of an interesting idea of nudge and soft paternalism. And the soft paternalism argument, if you're not familiar with it, is sort of the new wave. Old paternalism is, I know what's good for you and I'm here to help. New soft paternalism is, you know what's good for you, I'm here to help. Right? And so the idea, if you go to stick.com, have you guys ever gone there? Anybody gone there? Okay, so have you put any money on it?
My buddy did.
Okay.
He was a referee.
Okay, you're the referee. So here's the idea. You want to lose weight, you put your credit card on there and you put $1,000 that if you don't lose weight, it goes to the I Love Rush Limbaugh Society. Right? So, or if you love Rush Limbaugh, it goes to the Re-elect Obama Society. It doesn't matter. You put it towards something you don't really want the money to go to. And so here I am to help you achieve your goal by making you commit to this. And so then you have a buddy who monitors your behavior. So can we use this type of soft paternalism for small populations? Can we actually get people that we want to commit to this sort of stuff to put their assets involved in this? Yeah, if you believe Thaler and Sunstein, this is the way we want to organize it. So thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And I'm done. Thank you.
So I'm interested in this the idea that I don't know how you put it on your slide, but basically appealing to the better angels of people's nature versus paying them,
Right.
and that you may actually undermine them by paying them. Is there empirical evidence that that's the case? And that
So the question is, the question is, will monetary incentives drive out your goodwill? Yeah, no, there is. There is empirical evidence that if paying people will drive out social preferences, and you start focusing in on yourself. But there is also evidence that waiting for people to act on those social preferences is pretty slow, right? And so the big debate about energy efficiency is, do you adopt energy technology because it's the right thing to do, or do you need a price spike in the price of gasoline to start riding a bike or driving a Prius? And so the debate goes back and forth about whether or not waiting for people to do the right thing, even though we know that we want to do the right thing, takes too long versus interjecting in prices to get them to move quicker and then driving out that. And that's sort of, I don't think we have an answer to that, but there's definitely evidence that it does.